Hi, I'm Lon Schiffbauer. In this video series, we've been talking about the Tuckman Model, which really explains the 5 essential stages necessary to form a team. These are forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. Now, we've already talked about forming, and that means it's time for storming. This is the stage that everybody dreads, and for really good reason. In this stage of team development, everybody agrees that there's a job to be done. They get that, but they're still not willing to give up their individuality, which means they're not yet ready to come together as a team. Now, one of the reasons for this is that there's no shared vision. They don't all agree on what needs to be done and how it needs to get done. And so yeah, everybody's working, everybody's doing things, but they're doing it pretty much for their own purposes and their own agenda. Let's take this scene, for example, with Captain America and Iron Man. Cap is pretty interested in forming a team, but Stark really isn't having much of it.
Stark, we need a plan of attack!
I have a plan. Attack.
And not surprisingly, this exposes a lot of different styles, how people like to work and get things done. And you know what? These styles don't always, sort of play well together.
If we don't stay focused, he'll succeed. We have orders. We should follow them.
Following's not really my style.
And you're all about style, aren't you?
So if you've got no shared vision and you've got different operating styles sort of clashing, it's not surprising at this stage that we would see interpersonal conflict. As a result, team members tend to become very frustrated with each other. This is often seen in sort of unsolicited comments and snide remarks on the side. You know exactly what I mean. Cap is pretty frustrated with Stark and his, seemingly lackadaisical approach to the work, and so kind of rides Stark a little bit. But you know what? Stark just sloughs him off with his witty comeback.
Are you nuts?
Sure, Sam. You really have got a lid on it, haven't you? What's your secret? Mellow jazz, bongo drums, huge bag of weed?
Is everything a joke to you?
Funny things are.
Threatening the safety of everyone on this ship isn't funny.
Another aspect of the storming stage is the perception that some people aren't towing the line or pulling their weight. There's the idea that some people are just letting others do all the work. Now, this really isn't hard to imagine when you think about the fact that there's no shared vision and there's different operating styles and people are frustrated with each other. I mean, yeah, maybe some people are slacking, but what's more likely is that everybody's doing their own thing for their own reason. Take this scene with Captain America, for example. He thinks he's doing what needs to be done. On the other hand, Stark thinks he's doing what needs to be done.
You're tiptoeing, big man. You need to strut.
And you need to focus on the problem, Mr. Stark.
You think I'm not?
Stark very much felt that he was focused on the problem, but he was pursuing it in a different way, not the way that Cap thought should have been done. Now, another result of all this, interpersonal conflict and lack of shared vision is team members start to sort of jockey for position and compete for recognition and influence over the team. The idea is, since there's no shared vision, everybody wants to kind of assert their own agenda. Once again, we can see this with Rogers and Stark as they jockey for position and leadership over the team.
Of the people in this room, which one is A, wearing a spangly outfit, and B, not of use?
Now, it's probably not surprising that during this storming stage, there's also going to be a lot of misperceptions about what people say and meant, or meant by what they said. And these misperceptions, they're not going to bring about a rational response, but rather a very emotional and sometimes hurtful response. So all of this means that during the storming stage, as people are competing for influence and sort of passing off snide remarks and exploiting interpersonal conflict and asserting their own agenda and so forth, people are going to start looking around for partners. They're going to start looking around for support. So what happens during this stage is we see the formation of sub-teams. People start to pair up and really kind of work as a sub-team to assert their position over the overall team. It's pretty easy to see a sub-team developing between Stark and Banner early on. The two get along really well. They're both uber smart genius scientists, and there's a lot of mutual respect. And so this sub-team actually ends up continuing all throughout the series.
Finally, someone who speaks English.
Is that what just happened?
It's good to meet you, Dr. Banner. Your work on anti-electron collisions is unparalleled, and I'm a huge fan of the way you lose control and turn into an enormous green rage monster.
And that brings us to our last point. With all these sub-teams bubbling up in this toxic storming environment, we're going to start seeing hallway conversations. I mean, the sort of, people stepping outside the room after the meeting and saying, boy, what's the deal with him? And gosh, where does he get off thinking that? And who does she think she is? Kind of the commiserating, often happening between the sub-team members. For example, we can see this with Stark and Banner pretty quickly.
That's the guy my dad never shut up about. Wondering if they shouldn't have kept him on ice.
So, given all these aspects of the storming stage, it's really no surprise that we dread coming together as a team. And as a matter of fact, that might cause us to think, can't I just skip this stage? Well, that's one aspect of the Tuckman model. You really can't. Forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning, we have to go through these stages. However, there's nothing that says that storming, while it is necessary, has to be really long and horribly painful. It can be relatively short and relatively painless. It just depends on us. How aware of our feelings are we going to be? How aware of our behaviors are we going to be? How much are we going to communicate and talk about these things? That's going to lead us into norming. The things that got us into storming, a lack of communication during the forming phase, are going to help us get out of storming and into norming, one of which will be increased communication. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So stick with me. Things are going to start getting excellent. I hope you'll join me.